I was 17, and Halloween was supposed to be fun that year. My friends and I had planned to meet at a party that evening, but since I had a car, I got stuck driving. Everyone lived close by except for Jake, who lived a bit out of the way. It wasn't too far though, so I agreed to pick him up. The drive was quiet. The streets were almost deserted. I figured everyone was already at their parties or out trick-or-treating. When I got to Jake's house, it was dark, not a single light on. I thought maybe he got tired of waiting and left, or his phone died. But when I knocked on his door, no one answered. I was about to turn back to my car when I noticed someone standing across the street, just barely visible under the glow of a streetlight. It was a guy in a dark hoodie, watching me, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. At first, I thought it was just some guy in costume, maybe a prank, so I ignored him and walked back to my car. But as soon as I did, he started walking across the street toward me, slow and steady. Every instinct told me to get in my car and lock the doors, but I hesitated. "Hey man, can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond, just kept walking until he was about 10 feet away, then stopped. I could feel him staring, even though his face was shadowed by his hood. I tried again. "Yo, I'm looking for my friend. Do you know Jake?" My hands were shaking so badly that my keys rattled against the car door as I tried to unlock it. That's when he spoke, real calm and low. I wouldn't do that. My blood ran cold. There was something unsettling about his voice, like he was used to telling people what to do. Before I could move, he took a step forward, his stance tense, as if he was sizing me up. "I saw your friend," he continued, tilting his head. "He left with me earlier. Didn't he tell you?" Every instinct screamed at me to leave. I went for my car door, ignoring him, when he suddenly lunged forward. I barely got the door closed and locked before he slammed his hands against the window, his face inches from the glass, eyes wild and unblinking. He jiggled the handle, laughing, like he was daring me to try something. Suddenly, he began pounding on the windows, screaming like some wild animal. Panicking, I threw the car into reverse, backed out of the driveway, and floored it down the street, desperate to get away. But then I saw him in the rearview mirror. He was chasing after me, faster than I thought anyone could run. His shoes slapped against the pavement, the hood of his sweatshirt bouncing with each step. I couldn't see his face, but his movements were fast, erratic, and every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, he was closer than before. I practically skidded around the corner. My tires screeched as I sped down the empty street, watching him fade into the distance. But he kept running, even as I turned the next corner. When he was finally out of sight, I barely stopped at a red light, my whole body shaking. When I finally got to the party, I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop replaying that man's face, his voice, the way he'd run after my car like he was desperate. I was still jumpy an hour later when Jake pulled me aside, his face pale. "Hey, did you get my text earlier?" he asked, looking almost nervous. I shook my head, confused. "No, my phone didn't go off." Then he held out his phone, showing me a message he had sent while I was on my way to his house, telling me to stay away and there's someone outside watching. I checked my phone and there it was, the same message from an hour earlier, but it had never buzzed, never popped up. I wonder, was I the one that stranger had been waiting for, or was he just getting started, and I'd been his first escape? This happened to me many Halloweens ago when I was 15. I'd been out trick-or-treating with my friends in our neighborhood, but it was getting late, so I decided to walk back home alone. My friends lived on the opposite side of town, and I figured I'd be fine. It was Halloween, so there were still a few kids and families out, though the streets were starting to quiet down. I was about 10 minutes from my house, just walking along, looking at my phone, when I noticed a van creeping along the curb a little ways behind me. It was an old, dark blue van, and while I couldn't see much inside, I could tell someone was in the driver's seat, watching me. I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were looking for a parking spot, or maybe they were lost. But as I kept walking, the van continued to crawl along at my pace, never passing me. When I'd speed up, it would speed up too, and when I slowed down, so did the van. At this point, I started to feel uneasy. I decided to test it. I crossed to the other side of the street to see if they'd follow. I tried not to look back too obviously, but as I glanced over my shoulder, my stomach dropped. The van had crossed too, slowly rolling along, keeping pace. My heart started pounding, and I tried to stay calm, telling myself it could be a coincidence. I picked up the pace, walking faster toward my house, which was only a few blocks away. But the van kept following, creeping along, its headlights now off. That was when I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just some random person out on Halloween night. I decided to take a detour down a side street, hoping to lose them. I turned the corner and started running as soon as I was out of sight. I sprinted for a couple of blocks, weaving through side streets, trying to put as much distance between me and the van as possible. I figured that if I could cut through my neighbor's backyard, I'd be able to get to my house without them seeing where I went. But as I rounded the corner to my street, I stopped dead in my tracks. The van was there, idling at the end of my block. My blood ran cold. I had no idea how they knew where I'd gone, but there they were, parked on the curb, waiting. I ducked behind a row of bushes, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was nearly dead, but I didn't want to draw attention by turning on the flashlight. I crouched down, watching as the driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. He looked around, his face half hidden under a baseball cap, before he started slowly walking up the sidewalk, looking for me. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. I watched him walk closer, scanning every shadow, and for a second, I thought he was going to find me. Then, just as he was about to reach the bushes where I was hiding, I heard voices in the distance, other kids walking down the street. The man turned toward them, then quickly climbed back into his van. I waited, watching, until he finally pulled away and drove off. I didn't move until I was sure he was gone. Then I bolted straight to my house, locking the door behind me. I never saw that van again. But over the next few weeks, I heard stories from other kids who'd been followed the same way. They'd seen the same dark blue van slowly trailing them as they walked home at night, all of them terrified as they managed to escape. No one was ever arrested, and no one knew who he was. Now, as an adult, every Halloween, I watch the streets filled with kids and feel a pang of dread whenever a car slows near them, haunted by the thought that someone, hidden in the shadows, could be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 2 years ago, I moved to a quiet town, the kind of place where people wave when you pass, and Halloween is a big deal. I'm not one for the holiday, but I decided to stay home and hand out candy. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the sun was just setting when the first round of kids showed up. By the time the last group left, it was already dark, and I was getting ready to call it a night. Just as I turned off the porch light, I heard a knock at the door. I figured I'd missed a group of late-night trick-or-treaters, so I grabbed the candy bowl and opened the door. But there was no one there. The street was empty, dead quiet. I shrugged it off, shut the door, and headed back inside. A few minutes later, there was another knock. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I checked through the peephole, but again, no one was there. I felt a chill creep down my spine, but I chalked it up to a prank and ignored it. I'd almost sat back down when, bang, 3 loud knocks echoed through the house, like someone was hitting the door with their fist. I opened it fast, hoping to catch whoever it was. But again, no one. The street was dark, my porch empty. I decided to step outside to check things out. As I scanned the yard, I saw something at the edge of my driveway right under the streetlight. It was a pumpkin, but it wasn't one of mine. It looked old, half-rotted, with a twisted, creepy grin carved into it. There was something about it that felt off, like it had been left there just for me. I took a step toward it, but the moment I did, I heard footsteps behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there. My nerves were shot, and I told myself it was just some teens pulling a Halloween prank. I picked up the pumpkin, intending to toss it, but as I turned around, I noticed something scratched into the back of it. "We see you." That was it. I hurried inside and locked the door, checking all the windows. I tried to brush it off as some Halloween joke, but my nerves were buzzing, and an eerie sensation crept over me, like someone was watching from the shadows. Just as I was starting to settle down, all the lights in the house went out. I grabbed my flashlight and crept through the house, trying to stay calm. But then I heard it, the soft crunching of leaves outside, moving slowly around the side of the house. I turned off my flashlight and held my breath, listening. The footsteps paused, then continued, moving closer until they stopped right outside my window. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, but I could see shadows shifting on the other side of the curtains, moving in and out of the light. Then, without warning, I heard a loud bang on the window. I jumped back, my heart racing. I called out, demanding to know who was there, but all I heard was laughter. Soft, mocking laughter drifting through the darkness. I bolted to the back of the house and checked the locks again. I was about to call the police when I heard the laughter again, louder this time, coming from the front yard. Against my better judgment, I peered out the window, and that's when I saw them. A group of teenagers standing perfectly still, all wearing strange, grinning masks, watching the house in complete silence. One of them lifted his hand and pointed directly at me. Truly terrified, I backed away, feeling trapped, outnumbered, and totally alone. Just as I was dialing 911, the teens turned and disappeared into the night as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving me in silence. When the police arrived, they found nothing but the rotting pumpkin, still sitting under the streetlight, staring up at the house with its twisted grin. Since that night, I hated Halloween. Every autumn I feel a lingering dread as the leaves start to fall, watching the neighborhood for any sign of them. I stopped handing out candy. I stopped going outside after dark, and can't help feeling that they're still out there. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch glimpses from my window, a shape at the edge of the streetlight, or the faintest echo of laughter drifting in the wind. I tell myself it's just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I know they're waiting for me.